Thank you. On Sunday, at Mr. Mace's fantastic abode, we are doing some of the new stuff, but some poetry, some songs, but we're also telling the life story of Jack Sorensen, one of our West Australian poets. Fabulous story. Born in Kalgoorlie in 1907 during the height of the boom. Left when he was 7 years old and went to work. His parents bought an orchard in Maida Vale. Anybody been to Perth? Maida Vale's in the crouching in the foothills of the Darling Ranges. He grew up there, but his mum was Irish. His dad was Danish, quite phlegmatic obviously, but his mother was English-Irish, and she had all this great font of tales and legends of Ireland that she'd been taught by her mother. So she passed it on to Jack. And in the end, by the time he was 9 or 10, he was convinced he was going to be a poet. That's all he wanted to be. Not just a poet, he wanted to be one of those great bards that roar up and down great rush-strewn halls, shouting out great, fantastic poems for the people. And he became so enamoured of this. One of his first poems, he was 11. There was a fantastic little poem called The Anzac Private, just talked about what a waste war was. And that was in 1918 when he was just a boy. What was I talking about?
Jack.
Oh, that's right. Thank you very much.
An early foothills work pattern was that the boys who lived and worked the orchards with their families would do this over the autumn, winter, spring, and then they'd head off in huge groups.
First of all, they go up to the Swan River.
Oh, of course, yes.
Up to the Swan Valley to do the grape picking, and then, as John said, they pile into trucks, big contracting gangs, and head up to the northwest. Now, Jack, before he went up there, decided that he was going to learn to be a boxer. Right. And his whole principle of doing it was so he would have the right, which is, when you think about it, a bit rich, but the right to decry his poetry anywhere he liked and at any time he liked. And if anybody, and as you can imagine, poetry was not frowned upon, was looked on slightly askance by burly people in those days, and sometimes...
What's changed?
No, it's a little bit better. It's a little bit better. But oftentimes you get an ill-timed comment, as Jack called them. And there's one we're going to do on Sunday called The Song of the State Battery. He's halfway through it in the Boulder pub, full of rambunctious mad miners and carriers and everybody else. And he's halfway through it, and somebody, and they used to say, hey, this bloke can do a poem, but watch out, he can box too. He can fight too, or whatever. And this bloke passed what was considered an ill-timed comment, and Jack carried on doing this poem and wandered over in this huge crowded bar, knocked this bloke out without missing a beat of the poem, and then went back and all of them went, yeah, right then. They thought it was wonderful.
Easy to understand when you hear that Jack was actually state welterweight champion under the name of Johnny Brown. He was a very good boxer.
Yes, he certainly was.
Yes.
And so...
so they do the contracting teams, up to 50 men, up the northwest. They used to shear 100,000 sheep every season in the northwest, which is a lot for those days.
On the De Grey and the Murchison stations, fantastic. He became a gun shearer, and not only that, and a wool class, he became a shearer's poet. And here's one of his poems.
Yes, this is, which one are we doing?
Cash the Pig.
Cash the Pig, yes. Yeah, shearer's poem.
He was one of those poets that there was no fancy, there were no frills. He told the story as they were told in those days. And apparently he'd be shearing away, grinding away on the shears, and then he'd suddenly stop and he'd wander outside and he'd twirl his forelock. He'd sit like that, and all the shearers go, hey, here comes another poet. And sure enough, this was one of them now. This is called How We Cashed the Pig, and it was early bartering days in Australia before the banks took over and ruined our lives for us completely. All right.
What year are we talking?
Born 1907, so about 1918 to 1920. He's shore for about 10 years, and then in the early 30s, he became a journeyman journalist for the goldfields. And then he also became a goldfields poet. We'll come into that later on.
I was over in Coolgardie there one time with my first encounter with him, and they had his poem up Bailey Street. And it's a beautiful poem. Yes. And I recorded it and took it home, and it's one I used to do. It's a great poem.
Really? we might sing the song for you, because wonderful story. Beautiful. Yeah. But first, How We Cashed the Pig. We shore for a farmer at Wallaby Bend, myself and my mate Dan McLean. And whilst we were shearing, an old bushman friend wrote saying, watch out, this farmer is mean. We finished the shearing, the flock was not big, and imagine our wrath and dismay when he goes to a sty and comes back with a pig and says, "This is all I can pay." We set off next morn down the long dusty track in the blackest of humours, I fear. I carried the pig in a swag on me back, and McLean trudged along with the gear. I talked as we journeyed, it lightened my load, and I'm pointing out how we'd been robbed when we comes to a shanty by the side of the road, and I turns out me pockets and sobbed.
"Cheer up,"
Cries McLean,
"we'll drink and forget that old blighter back in the bend."
and season,
Says I on a soft.
says I in soft accents imbued with regret, "Alas, we have nothing to spend." My comrade replied,
"What a dullard you are. We'll drink and make merry in style."
and seizing the piggy walked into the bar and ordered our drinks with a smile. Our host filled them up and went away with the pig, as though the affair was not strange. We'd scarcely had time our refreshments to sweep when he comes back with 10 piglets for change. We stayed at that shanty that night and next day. Good liquor was much cheaper then, and gladly rejoicing, we went on our way with a basket of eggs and a hen. So,